I'm sitting up in the tent and I'm just like debating. And that's when I realized that standing over my tent was a giant object, a giant shadow. Yeah, hi, I'm Hugh Knight. I was up mining for agates and crystals just as a hobby my friends and I are involved with. And while I was up in the mountains, I was by myself at this point, and I climbed up to a mountaintop, looked down into the lower valley, and immediately saw what looked like a Bigfoot. And I laughed to myself in my head, and I'm like, that's funny. That looks like a Sasquatch right there. Thinking, oh, it's a shadow, it's a stump, it's something. And then this thing started walking, had legs, arms swinging. You know, at one point I watched it lift its arms and bounce its hands across treetops as it was walking through these little trees. And that really kind of weirded me out, because that's something I do when I walk through the brush and the weeds and stuff, just some weird thing I'll do. And so while I'm looking at this thing and I'm kind of in disbelief, you know, questioning my sanity, you know, like, what is going on? How am I looking at a Sasquatch right now? And realized I didn't have my phone on me. My phone was in my truck. I could see my truck. It was down the hill. So I decided, you know, I sat there kind of debating myself, like, should I just stay here and stare at this thing, or should I go fetch my phone? You know, and then after a little bit of back and forth in my head, I decided, you know, nobody's just going to take my word for this. I have to go get my phone. So run down, get my phone, climb back up to this mountaintop, and it took me a minute, but I was able to locate it and video it, but it's far away, and I zoomed in on it as best I can. I filmed it for about an hour. I stood there trying to get a good shot of it, but it was just so far away. My phone doesn't zoom very well. It's not a great phone, and I was fighting with these clouds that kept rolling in and obscuring the shot. So I would actually shut the camera off and wait for the clouds to lift, and then I would start filming again. And this went on for a while, like I said, about an hour, until eventually I just had to go. I couldn't stay there forever. I was supposed to be home by then, and the clouds had gotten so thick that I didn't even know if it was still down there anymore. And so I left and I went to my parents' house, because that's where my wife and kids were at. And my parents lived near this wilderness, about an hour away from it. So I told everybody what happened, and, you know, of course, they're kind of puzzled, kind of curious, like, oh, how do you know it was this or that? And, you know, the basic questions. You know, they believed that I believed it, but, you know, they weren't sure probably what they believed exactly. And so the next day we went back up there, and I went right to that same viewpoint. It was a nice, clear, crystal clear, sunny day. And I looked right down at where the creature was, and there was a stump right there, a big stump. I didn't know there was a stump there because the body of the creature had blocked the stump the day before. And so that's when I was assuming it must have been digging in that stump for grubs or doing something. You know, why was it at that stump for that long? I had this footage, but the footage was crap. And I just couldn't believe I became one of those guys, you know, who has this blurry, unclear footage of a Sasquatch. You know, the exact kind of footage I've been rolling my eyes at for years and years. I have spent so much of my life playing around in the woods, growing up in the woods, and I've worked in forestry, and I currently work in tree removal work. And so I'm right at home out in the woods and in climbing mountains and all that. And so I immediately went and bought better camera equipment, camping supplies, and went hard. I was going out by myself multiple nights, and, you know, right off the bat, I started finding things. Like, the first kind of big thing was this really amazing X structure, and I knew what it was immediately because I had seen other researchers talk about these structures. And then I found a really amazing footprint. I was climbing into this canyon system. This wilderness is all logging area. So there's not a lot of people up there because it's not like a national park. There's no hiking trails. There's no campground. It's just endless mountains of trees and logging roads and very little people. And most of it's all private property because, you know, the logging companies, they don't let people just come in and use their property. And so it's perfect for Sasquatch. I mean, there's so much territory up there. And so I started honing in on these rivers right away, these rivers that carve these little canyons and valleys, because that was one of the valleys where I first sighted this thing. And I was exploring a canyon system, and I found this footprint off this trail off the side of the river. And this footprint it really is one of, still to this day, one of the best footprints I've found. You could see the toes, you could see the ankle, and that was really kind of a big moment where I was like, okay, you know, I'm not crazy. There's footprints where there shouldn't be. There's weird structures I'm finding. And then from there, I pursued the canyons, another canyon system far away. And it was really, really hard to get to this place. I had to drive my truck way up a logging road, park at a gate, use an e-bike, go in about 7 or 8 miles on an e-bike, then ditch the e-bike, cross a river, and then take that river to a contributory river and follow it for an hour. I mean, so I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I was relatively close to the valley where I saw the Sasquatch in the very beginning. Really hard to get into that valley. And as I was hiking up this river, I look up and I see a big giant log upside down, stabbed in the ground, roots up in the air. And I was familiar with the upside down tree phenomenon. And so when I was staring at one, you know, that was probably for me like one of the biggest moments where I was just elated. I mean, it was almost as good as if I was staring at a Sasquatch itself, because I know enough about trees and logging and all that kind of stuff to know that there's no way you could ever blame this on Mother Nature. And there is a shred of truth to that, because Department of Natural Resources has made people start doing this thing where they install logs in the ground, and sometimes they're upside down with roots, sometimes they're just logs. They call them snags, and they claim that it's for some kind of habitat for certain animals that need dead trees to burrow into. Personally, I think that's all BS. I think the Department of Natural Resources has people do that specifically so they can discredit when people do find these upside down trees in the ground. And because of that, you get a lot of people that try to discredit the upside down tree phenomenon. And it's frustrating, because I fully believe that elements of our federal government know that these things exist, and they're doing whatever they can to keep it a secret for some reason. Anyway, back to where I was at. I see this upside down tree, and I climb up this embankment, and I end up finding like 7 or 8 of them up there, and all different sizes, all different shapes, but trees stabbed into the ground, or logs, I should say, stabbed into the ground. Some of them had roots, some of them didn't. As time went on, things did start to get really weird with experiences out there. I was getting into this valley called, I call this canyon, I call it Dead Canyon. And the first time I entered this place, I spent the day down there, and I had my dog with me. And I found a whole bunch of agates. I'm talking like big agates. This is an agate that I pulled out of Dead Canyon. Like I said in the beginning, I was a rock hound that ended up seeing a Sasquatch. And so I'm down in Dead Canyon looking for Sasquatch, but I kept finding these rocks. So I started putting them in a bag, and I hiked some out. And that was a hell of a hike with 80 pounds of rock on your back. And as I'm getting up that canyon wall, something from down in the canyon bottom where I was just at screams this sound at me that it's just this really like a terrifying sound, really. And it's not a typical vocalization that you'll hear people have on audio. It's very different. And that was my first experience with a vocal. And I've had many since then. But that particular sound, like I said, I wish I could get a recording of it, because it's very different than anything anybody's ever presented or played. And it really it startled my dog. My dog was very scared by that sound, and scared me too. I mean, it was a very unfriendly type of noise. It just blasted out of that canyon at us. And I took it as kind of like a warning or an announcement or something. But I know what that was not any normal animal that we're used to hearing or seeing. I mean, I'm confident it was a Sasquatch, but it was just a very weird sound. And then I'm in a campsite. Oh, this is a few months later. And I'm all by myself. And I've been up all night, hiding in this hunting blind with my night vision cameras and all that. And so I went to bed around 7 a.m., 7 a.m., right around sunrise. And I'd been asleep for a few hours, and that same sound from Dead Canyon woke me up, except when it first woke me up, I was kind of delusional and didn't realize what I was hearing, and I had an earplug in one ear, and that's what I do when I go to bed. When the sun's coming up, the birds are so noisy, I put one earplug in one ear, and I put one ear against the pillow. That way, if I turn my head, I can hear, but I can fall asleep, because I'm a very light sleeper. And so I hear this sound, super loud, super weird sound, and I wake up and I'm like half dead, don't know what's going on. And I think to myself, like, what is that sound? That must be like logging equipment or something. And I just brush it off and I fell back to sleep. And then I get woke up again, and I'm just kind of like, same sound, this really bizarre noise. And I'm like, what's going on? Why am I hearing that? And I fall back asleep. And then the third time it's blasted into my tent, I realized, holy shit, that's the sound from Dead Canyon. That's the exact same sound. So I jump up, run out the tent, and I'm looking around, and it's broad daylight, at this point, 10, 11 a.m., whatever it was. There's nothing there, nothing to be seen. But that's when I realized, sitting next to my tent, just 5 feet from my tent, was a big red apple that I had set up there with a trail cam aimed at it. And that red apple was gone. And around that same time period, I had been honing in on these things where it's trees that are they're conifer trees, timber trees, evergreen trees, because those are my main focus. I don't focus a lot of attention on the deciduous trees, the leafy trees, because even though I do recognize that the Sasquatch manipulate deciduous trees a lot, I try to only focus on the conifers, because the conifers, they look like this. They grow with perfect symmetry. So when you find them bent and twisted in very weird ways, something isn't right. Whereas with like a maple or a conifer, those trees do weird stuff on their own. Anyway, so I'm looking at these arches, and what these are is they're big, huge timber trees that are bent into this impossible shape. There's no reason for Mother Nature to even be able to do this to these if it wanted to. And most of them have a bunch of scarring and scraping where you can see that they were manipulated and bent and wedged and forced into these really unnatural positions. And I just kind of been honing in on these and finding them all over, and recognized something wasn't right with them. And around the time period that I'm doing this, I'm up there, and I have a friend of mine who's a geologist, and he wanted to come see some of these just insane deposits of agates that I was telling him about. And I'm showing him an arch, a newly formed arch, on the way to go into the bottom of this canyon with him. And he recognized that there was a pine cone sitting underneath this arch that shouldn't be there. And at first I didn't quite understand why he cared about this big pine cone. And then he, explained to me, this is a pine cone that does not grow in this area, will not grow in this area. It's a high elevation pine cone, and here it is underneath this arch. And in fact, I have one of these. This is one of the pine cones that was brought in there by a Sasquatch. I mean, I fully 100% believe that. I can't. Doesn't make any sense. This pine cone should not be in that forest. This is a subalpine tree that needs a minimum of 4,000 feet elevation to grow, to even be healthy. In all of my research area, the nearest mountain, that's the highest mountain in that area is 2,500 feet elevation. And it's not even a part of my research area. My whole research area is about 1,000, 1,500 foot elevation. So subalpine trees could not grow in there if they wanted to. And so anyway, he finds this pine cone and tells me how weird it is. And it's right underneath this arch. So it was interesting. And we kept the pine cone. And then it was, a month or so later, and my son is he's camping with me and a friend of mine. And one night we're in the tent, my son, my dog, and me, and then my friend was sleeping in his vehicle. And I set my alarm to wake me up about 4 a.m. to vibrate and get me up. And so my phone wakes me up, and I'm sitting up in the tent, and I'm just like debating, because I was going to go out with my night vision and walk around in the dark and do it by myself. But I was debating it, whether I really wanted to get up, and I sat there for a little while. And that's when I realized that standing over my tent was a giant object, a giant shadow, because I set lighting up around in my campsite, all this weird lighting that creates like this Christmas decoration type, rave type atmosphere. And that's how my campsite is at night. I do that to create some kind of something strange that the Sasquatch are not used to seeing, something to pique their curiosities with all these fancy lights. And so because of those lights that were all set up in the forest surrounding my tent, I could clearly see a big giant something standing right over my tent, and it was just right above me, and it's rocking back and forth, gently just standing there. And I'm kind of freaked out because, I mean, there's just a thin layer of fabric separating me from this giant thing standing above me. But I didn't know what to do, and so I grabbed my camera, and I turn my camera on, and it makes this beep beep sound. And right when it made that sound, the giant shadow just goes poof, and just it's gone, just like that, in a flash. It made no sound, nothing, just gone. And I sat there kind of not sure what to do, debating. But I didn't really know what my plan was. I still had to unzip the tent and crawl out. And, so as I sat there kind of not sure what to do, I fell back asleep. Woke up around 7 and get out of the tent. And then a little bit later, my buddy gets out of his car. He slept in his car. And immediately he asked me, "What were you doing last night around my car?" And I was like, I didn't go near your car last night. He's like, "You weren't looking in the windows. You weren't all around my car." I was like, "No, I didn't come out of the tent last night." So whatever was standing over my tent was also snooping around his car, unless there was more than one of them. And so that next morning, my son and I were out wandering around, and I went to check out an arch. As I'm zooming in on these arches and really focusing on these arches, I set up a trail cam. I found this site that was real interesting because it had 2 huge arches. And I put 2 trail cams in there facing different directions, but both kind of near each other. And I go to check that trail cam, and I find 3 pictures of this blob of white light moving through the forest in broad daylight, which is really almost impossible. I mean, you can go out on a bright sunny day with a high-powered spotlight or a lantern or something like that, you can't even really tell it's on because the sunlight drowns it out. So whatever this blob of white light that I got pictures of moving through the forest in broad daylight, bright sunny day, whatever it was, it's emitting a lot of light, for it to trigger the trail cam. And in those click, click, click pictures of this blob of white light moving through the forest, one of the pictures shows a really weird indent on the ground that looks like a footprint. It's really weird. I don't know what it is, but it's directly below the white blob of light, and it appears to be a footprint, but it's only in that one of the 3 pictures. And so that was, pretty amazing to catch that. I've heard a lot of people talk about the orbs and the light phenomenon that surrounds Sasquatch. And so to capture something on the trail cam that corroborates that, I was pretty excited about that. My first sighting that took place on that mountaintop was the day before Father's Day. So, 1 year later, my wife's like, what do you want to do for Father's Day? And I told her, I said, well, I want to be up in my research area because it was, exactly 1 year to the day I want to be up there just for sentimental reasons or whatever. So my wife said, okay, that's fine, but the kids and I are going to come with you. And so we're all camping up there. That trail cam that captured that blob of light that I was telling you about underneath the arches, that same exact trail cam, which is one of the cheapest, lowest quality trail cams I own. It's some used trail cam I bought off OfferUp. And ironically, it's the one that keeps getting these images. It captures this body. It's something on 2 legs, shaped like a human, except it's almost completely see-through, like translucent. And it gets like 3 or 4 pictures of this figure standing there. And there's this weird blob in front of it that you can't really tell what the hell it is. It's like this dark blob of mass in front of the creature. And you get a few shots of it, and then it just disappears. And then you get a few shots of this black mass that's just triggering the camera. I wasn't a big believer in the cloaking and all that stuff. I thought that just seemed, too hard to believe. And it's like, come on, we're trying to even get people to believe these things exist. And now we're trying to convince people that they're magically see-through and can cloak. And so I didn't want anything to do with that. And so when I capture this thing on my camera that is, like a translucent being, and it seems to just disappear with no real explanation, I know what it was. It's a Sasquatch, just like that blob of white light. In some way, shape, or form, I know that was a Sasquatch. I'm not saying, I don't know. I don't know exactly how, but I know that blob of white light has something to do with them, whether it's them while they're cloaked and that's some kind of shimmer. I don't know, but I know that was them.